You just hear me yelling, I'm coming. Oh, Jesus. Looking hot. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I gotta do my makeup. It's fine. I'm fine. I prepared for this one heavily for like weeks. I already. Ooh, do you want some? Let me know. Oh, wait. I was supposed to open with this.
I need this to find neurologist TikTok or something, okay? Because my 9-year-old daughter started ADHD meds, and I need to show you something that has been just absolutely crazy. So her handwriting has been rough, and her teacher told us like to encourage her to draw pictures and paint and stuff like that. So we've been doing that for like the past 2 years. This book I got her 3 weeks ago because she goes through them like water. And this is some of her art, okay? This is before the ADHD meds. Like standard kid drawings. But this is like what she would normally draw. Like a little flower, little sky action. Like this is what she would draw. She's been on these meds for 4 days. As of today, 4 days. Yesterday, she came to me with a drawing and my jaw dropped. And today, she spent all day drawing, and I need to show you. I have questions, okay? This is what she drew today. Like, what? Like that, her doodles to this? And this is a switch, like a switch flipped in her brain. Like, you don't just go from like that to this. Is this normal? Like, how?
Isn't that wild?
What happened? Like, what switch got flipped in her brain? Because now
I came across that on TikTok yesterday. It made me cry and so mad at my parents. It's fine. I love them.
Oh, so
bye. I feel like my volume just kind of went down. It's fine. We'll figure it out. Okay. I had mentioned, if the audio is really bad, just spam twos. Okay. Just spam twos. I had mentioned that there was a really good episode. Did you just hear that? How did that? Something just hit my teapot, but I don't know what. It's like clink. What do you call it? I mentioned this episode that I came across like 2 weeks ago. This is another revolutionary one. I see some creators reacting to it, and sorry, I have one of those lozenges stuck to my roof or stuck to the roof of my mouth, but now I moved it. Hey. How's everyone doing? Whoa, we just got so loud. I'm done. I've been watching creators react to it, and they're not seeing the vibes I'm seeing. They're not seeing the energy, the revolutionary-esque vibes of this thing. So here I am. I was like, nay, nay. That pushed me to finally do this video. The reason that this episode is so groundbreaking is because you have two very smart people debating on what causes childhood obesity and obesity in general without your typical, um, it's multifaceted. They actually go through every single component of all the factors, all the frameworks, and you have one Mike. Both of them are Dr. Mike. It throws me off. One is actually a practitioner, family doctor, has his MD. The other one is in sports, exercise, science, but people call him Dr. Mike. He's not actually a doctor. So I don't know, how should we differentiate between the 2? Steroid Mike? I don't think he takes steroids, but you'll know what I mean. He's got the look, okay? Or like bald Mike, I don't know, we'll figure it out, but you have 2 really smart people, really careful about saying, um, overgeneralizations. Like, it's very rare that I come across people that actually go into some of these statistics and studies and have another person of, like, more equal yoke push back on it. Like, you would have to have experience in the field to do that, so I thought it was really interesting. A lot of bias comes into, well, everything. Where were you going with that? I don't know. Bias, I feel like we treat people who are, overweight pretty poorly in this country, and really any country, and it might not be obvious. Try to think of yourself in an airport, okay? We can all tell on ourselves when somebody is overweight, there's, like, that knee-jerk reaction to be like, and it's because we have maybe a belief that they can help it, and in some scenarios they can, but more and more research has come out about obesity, how it changes epigenetics and stuff, how childhood obesity doesn't necessarily cause it, and sometimes you have the reverse, and that it's so complicated as, like, deconstructing, like, the myths around diabetes. I feel like that's another one that gets, fucking mixed up. People are treating people who were diagnosed in their childhood years as, like, Nazis, honestly. And so I'm laughing, I shouldn't be, but I think there's a lot of bias towards people that are overweight, a lot of judgment, and I feel like they tackled a lot of sort of where those beliefs come from, I guess. Aside from that, after reviewing the transcript a few times, like I said, I watched this 2 weeks ago, I was like, "Damn, they really nobody was, like, pushing a narrative." They both have their set beliefs or whatever, but they really brought up research really well. That, like, never happens, okay? People will usually cherry pick studies and then reframe it to suit them. Although there's some reframing going on, like I said, you have a doctor there, like an actual doctor who pushes back absolutely brilliantly. Like, it's so good. I'm so excited. I added subtitles to it so we could follow along better. A lot of it touches on, like, the philosophical determinism as well. Um, then I wanna also add in some of my own theories that I will state are not grounded. Well, they are actually grounded in science and studies, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving medical advice, it's just my own meandering experience. Um, I think just like I've said, I think there are a lot of people that struggle with substance abuse, alcoholism, who are probably undiagnosed with ADHD. Not all of them, okay, I can't say that, but I think a lot of them are undiagnosed. I feel the same way about obesity, and I've believed this since I was very young, okay? So maybe it's a fixed false belief, but I remember I remember so well that before I even understood what, treatment was out there for ADD, like, I knew ADD existed, I knew how it affected the brain and whatnot, but I didn't know about medication, even though my siblings, I believe, were on it at the time. I think I'm the only one that was, maybe Fallon too? I don't know. The 2 of us were not medicated? Whatever, doesn't matter. But I remember being driven to drink Coca-Cola, and I didn't like the taste of it. How does that happen? How does that happen? Like, why would you I don't know. Like, literally, even to sleep. It was like, why? I didn't watch TV. I did a little bit, but, I don't remember any Coca-Cola. Maybe it was subliminal, but, like, why was I drinking Coca-Cola so much, and why was I drinking it in my sleep? Fast forward to now, I'd never drink soda. I will, but I never reach for it, and what's the difference? I'm medicated. Can I draw this correlation? Probably not, but there was a study done that showed kids that drank Coca-Cola, if they were neurotypical, they would be off the fucking couch, okay? Hyper parents are like, "No sugar." But if they had undiagnosed ADHD, it would calm them down. Isn't that wild? Wild. Anyways, and what and you're probably like, "But why'd you drink it in your sleep?" Another thing, I get better sleep being medicated. Any other ADD folks here? I've heard some people say it. I think it's because if we can't focus during the day, what makes you think we can focus on being asleep? Bold. Anywho, okay, we'll get started. I forgot. I also have a video on big tobacco and big food because I would say, as a hard determinist who likes to follow the causal chain of this interconnected world through time and space, I like to go back to when we really started to see a shift. Respect your elders, baby. They're the ones pointing it out. They're like, there was a time where food wasn't making us fat. And if you didn't know, one of one of the biggest conspiracies that I believe to be absolutely true, no question about it, I feel like it should be talked about more, is big tobacco buying big food. Why is that? Why would that be the biggest conspiracy? Because 'Cause we're walking around acting like they haven't done anything to it, which, I don't mean to say they're poisoning. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying take what you will with that information. But what I am saying is that there's an art not an art, Jesus, there's a science to getting people addicted. We've talked about the bliss point on this channel a long time ago. We even use the bliss point as, like, a metaphor for how to find something that has just amount of this and the perfect amount of this to keep you wanting more. I've talked about it with, like, social dynamics. But the bliss point was actually like a chemical a way to get people addicted to something. Sorry. It's developed in the labs, and they used to do it in cigarettes, and then the people that ran the cigarettes, the tobacco industry, bought big food and started to implement the same measures with food. So, I have a video on that. I also have a video with the same Dr. Mike and that, uh I think she's a bariatric surgeon, sorry, forgot. I mentioned her in another video that they did an episode, I have her, and she talks about whether or not she thinks people should be medicated with Ozempic if they have obesity, so, we got a lot. Like this video if you haven't liked it already. Free way to help your bitch out. Okay, let's go. Here we go, baby.
How do people with more resources with which to buy food end up buying less food?
Can I play devil's advocate on all those questions?
Absolutely, every single one, because I have many retorts to every single devil advocacy.
Just to clarify, we got bald Mike, and then we got other Mike. The other Mike is the doctor. The bald one is called doctor, but isn't a doctor. Okay, bye.
Okay, so say the first question. How do people with more resources? Sorry.
How do people who are wealthier seem to be consuming less of a thing that costs money than more? It is at least requires a more complicated logic. And as you know, with Occam's razor, the more complex your logic becomes, just on very carte blanche levels of thinking, it becomes less likely to be true. So if someone says, okay, you take someone from the 1600s and you go, when people get richer, they get fatter. They're like, facts. And like, just kidding. It's actually the reverse. They're going to be like, what? It is, at face value, seems to be very confusing.
Sure.
And so you have
There's
to
a lot of
least,
that in science, though.
Sure, of course. And then you have to start walking down of like, well, what are the intricacies here? And we can address all the intricacies in turn. And they start to paint a little bit of a different picture, a picture that is not super politically correct, but also can be, I think, more closely aligned with reality, because one of the big stumbling blocks in reasoning that people have on this subject is you don't want to be the person that is derisive to the poor as a social class.
Sorry.
It's real fun to make fun of rich people. It's actively funny. It's within the Overton window.
It's safe.
It's safe.
Okay.
Not so with poor people. It's considered unbecoming. In the same way, if you say, well, rich people exhibit XYZ qualities because it's their fault, people are like, that's right, fuck them. You say that about poor people, a lot of people don't like that because it gives them very sad feelings inside. We should not be bound by how we feel about things to be able to elucidate what is actually going on, so that in that third order, we can help everyone, including poor people, navigate difficulties better.
Sure.
So the idea that we're going to pretend that poor people are sort of like protected against any kind of moral reasoning on our behalf, I think just needs to be discarded right up front.
Well, let's get more specific with it than talking about abstract. Like, let's say the notion of access of healthy food and the preponderance of processed food in someone's cabinet that is poor.
Sure.
Much higher likelihood to have cheaper food that is likely to be ultra processed, that is likely to create a habit of overconsumption, less satiating food, and as a result, potentially lead to their obesity. True or false?
True.
So then what's the retort for it?
Highly processed, convenient food is by no means the cheapest kind of food there is, not by a long shot. The cheapest kind of food there is by a long shot is largely unprocessed basic food, like bulk bought rice, not even bulk bought, any kind of white rice, canned vegetables, reduced price, high fat meats, and other such products. Canned beans are almost free. Calorie per calorie and nutritional content per nutritional content, they're undefeated. There is a
How do you know that?
Through looking into it substantially.
What are those people not doing?
Which people?
The poor people.
Oh boy, so that's its own thing. But just to finish the thought really
Yeah.
quick, the real cheapest way to get the best nutritional food is to buy those kinds of essential basics and not convenient snack foods. Personal story time. Not that this matters, just personal stories are mostly just like, oh, I'm an N of one. Just for the people that'll be like, this guy's rich, whatever. My parents were highly conscientious when we came to the United States. And the first time we had McDonald's was like 2 years into being here. And it was considered an unbelievable treat.
Yeah, same here.
Same,
Yeah.
right? That is
Like, I remember being with my dad and my friend, and I wanted a burger really badly. But I knew my dad would have to pay for a burger for my friend, and I was like, I'm not going to ask for it because I'm embarrassed. I don't want him to pay for it.
100%.
Yeah.
So like that clashes substantially with the conventional narrative of like, well, burgers are cheap, like compared to what? My parents and your parents were buying basics type of food, I suspect. Mine were for sure. I can't speak for you, but it seems like they were.
Yeah.
And so that already puts a little bit of a situation, because people like to envision that poor people are all relatively homogenous. That's absolutely not true. We can at least bifurcate them into two categories that we did earlier. Poor people of higher conscientiousness, poor people of lower conscientiousness.
What did you guys think of that? Lower conscientiousness, higher sorry.
If you say they're all
That's
the
not
same,
the
I think you said wealthy people.
only factor.
it's
hard to say that's the one dividing factor.
It is probably by far the biggest dividing factor.
Okay, so what is conscientiousness? Anybody know? I can put it in the chat. Conscientiousness, I was surprised to hear him say that. It's a big deal. What he's asserting right now is that one of the big traits that people, you could either have low conscientiousness, high conscientiousness, or mid-range. One's not necessarily better than the other. It it all goes into the other parts of the other makeup of the traits. So if you've ever heard of the acronym OCEAN in like psychology, you have openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. And they say that these traits make up your personality or whatever. It's one of those things where if you try to test for it, you could get varying versions depending on where you are in your life. So it's like, it's not necessarily definitive, but it also is. They have done studies to show if you have like high or low range, what your outcomes are like. And so conscientiousness in and of itself is how disciplined you are, organized. What else? What's like the definition? Conscientiousness. The personality trait of being responsible, careful, or diligent, organized, hardworking, goal-directed, and to adhere to norms and rules. It's one of the big 5 personality traits. It implies a desire to do a task well and take obligations to others seriously. Okay. So people who are low in conscientiousness have a propensity towards impulsivity. However, conscientiousness is also something that is very well documented as something that you can actually get better at doing. They've done studies that show people who have ADHD, because this is your crowd, my peeps, are more likely to be on the low conscientiousness spectrum. They did studies that showed that when they watched them over a period of like 20 years, whether they had like the group that was diagnosed and treated and the group that was undiagnosed, whatever, they showed that when medicated, the conscientiousness score increased. And so just to it's not like a death sentence is what I'm trying to tell you. Even myself, I've taken the personality test since fucking 7th grade. Okay. And conscientiousness was one that for a really long time stayed right in the middle for me. Right in the middle. So I had a little bit more than maybe somebody that I had a little bit more than like the low range, right? Mid range. But as I've gotten older, when I've retested myself, conscientiousness is one of my highest traits on the high end. And so another thing is that I have been around very intelligent people my whole life, very successful people. And they have all, well, not all, but it seems like there was a common theme. And it wasn't that they necessarily didn't partake in low tier activities. What do you even call it? It's like most of them used to party a lot. Most of them used to fuck off, if you will, for a while. Like some of the most successful people that I've ever been around didn't know what the fuck to do in their 20s, 30s, and even their 40s, and got really wealthy in their 50s. So it's like, my point to it is when they're talking about this, try not to get too in the fields about it. It's one of the only traits that I can like confidently say there's a lot of research to back up that this one can change. The other ones though are like pretty ingrained when you're born, which is fine. Are you an introvert, extrovert? It's like, but that conscientiousness, he's right that it does predict your outcomes better. But another thing is some of the smartest people I know haven't done shit with their lives yet. One of the biggest misconceptions, and people who are of high intelligence are aware of this, is that your intelligence doesn't always predict your outcomes. It's one of the biggest misconceptions. I know brilliant people who like live with their parents and are unemployed because they just won't get a job type shit. And it's one of the more sad uh things about the world, because it's like we live in a world that is for neurotypical people, but a lot of gifted people are not neurotypical. They're neurodivergent, and the world's not set up for them, and therefore they struggle in it. So just saying. Okay, love you.
Into how life outcomes occur for almost everyone short of intelligence.
So social experiments like the marshmallow experiment, the delayed gratification of it all, do you believe that that is a signal of conscientiousness? Jesus Christ.
It took a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why has the replication of it been a disaster?
Well, that's the one like done on like 4-year-olds and shit, right?
Yeah, they had the kids come in and they tracked them for their lives to say like those who exhibited delayed gratification were able to have higher SAT scores, decreased crime rates, like basically what you're saying, that they were able to exhibit this one factor at this age, and that on the whole projected a greater success in their life, what we deem success. And then when we try to replicate that, we A, don't see that same pattern occur, and B, when we re-look at the past data, we see that the poorer kids who didn't have marshmallows just grabbed at the first marshmallow and then had lives that were in a position where they had less access to education, to proper discipline, to those things that perhaps poor kids don't have access to, then have worse outcomes. So it was like, are we really looking at the delayed gratification, or are we looking at a more systemic issue here? And that's an interesting point.
The amount of evidence for trait conscientiousness impacting human lives throughout the lifespan is like 1 million times stronger than the marshmallow experiment, of which I'm not familiar with any serious behavioral geneticist that cites research to that effect.
So he's going into the thing that I think is like the biggest misconception that I just mentioned at the end of my spiel, which is that conscientiousness leads to better outcomes. Like I said, people who are very gifted, above intelligent, above genius level, don't necessarily have the best outcomes. It is very difficult to have like a next level genius and also function in a society that is deviations below. Okay, they're angry. Imagine if when you calculate the number of people that operate within the same IQ, if you want to use like the IQ example, the older you get, the further and further away you are from people that actually understand what you're even saying. Like that takes an emotional toll. I genuinely think like people should be getting their IQs tested, because they could like spend a lot of their adulthood like, why the fuck do I have social friction? And it's like, because you're not with your tribe. Your tribe is spread out across the world, you know? And when you can't connect with people, that takes an emotional toll, genius or not, you know what I mean? So just wanted to make sure I poisoned the well with my thoughts on this one.
For how important conscientiousness is. Psychometricians, behavioral geneticists, if you look up trait conscientiousness, how it expresses itself in life, the evidence for its enormous power in guiding people through their lives is overwhelming.
When do you measure it?
Say it again?
When do you measure it? And how do you measure it?
You can measure it at any point in a person's lifespan. The problem with measuring young children is that the correlation of whatever traits you have when you're very young to when you're old is actually quite low. And so, like, you know, when people have like a 4-year-old that's like, he's the genius for his age, like a lot of times that just ends up being quite regular later. He just got there earlier. But
Not true.
you can measure conscientiousness through a variety of behaviors in an ethnographic context. You just watch people do what they do and take very diligent notes. You can do it in an anthropological context. You can do it in a cultural context, studying different cultures. You can do it with a variety of validated tests like the Big Five personality, the Ocean scale. The Ocean scale is probably the most common one, and you can administer various tests of that nature to people of very many age ranges and situations. And they all give you a hint as to what's going on. But on aggregate, they paint a very, very similar picture overall.
So it's not the fact that there's a correlation between that trait and something else societally in their lives that's going well.
It's both. But there's a causal effect as well, because conscientious people over time make different choices. Highly conscientious people make different choices than lower conscientious people. We also know that conscientiousness is...
So when I first watched this and I was getting to know Bald Mike, this bald gentleman, handsome, but when I was getting to know what his beliefs were, I was like, there it is, conscientiousness and free will. It's like they make better choices. Some of the most intelligent people I know on this planet, like Elon Musk level, whether you think he's smart or not, just fucking doing lines. I'm not saying do drugs, but I've seen them do crazy shit. I used to work in nightclubs, for those that don't know. It's like, I'm not saying that it's like, well, maybe he wasn't. No, these people were like genius, brilliant. I can tell in the vibes. So it's just like, okay, makes good choices, do you? But another thing is like, if people, he's going to be making the negative assertion. So he's in the negative technically. And he's saying that people need to make better choices. And what causes people to make better choices? That trait, conscientiousness. Okay, so children who are ADD, and I'm using ADD as like my direct link to lower conscientiousness, undiagnosed, whatever, because it has that impulsivity. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm gonna do it. They show a significant correlation with medication over a 20-year span, changing their outcomes to be way more conscientious. It's like a reason that you should consider if ADD is like really prevalent in your family. It's definitely a case for medicating children. I'm not a doctor. I'm also not a fucking parent. You know, parents will make the best choices. I'm just saying there's a case for it because it directly affects that conscientiousness for later in life. If people are born to their circumstances and their parents don't even look for something like to treat ADD, whatever, then how did they really have any free will at all? I personally think these are biological things. I don't even think it's necessarily biological. I think they're like mental conditions, if you will. I think personally that most issues in the world are judged before somebody's biological drives are accounted for yet. ADD being one of them. I was talking to my sister yesterday, and who's more ADD than me. Okay, she was worse growing up. Love her. Love you. And she was saying, like, my place is a mess, and I have to go get this so I can get my medication again, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, stop beating yourself up. You're not medicated yet. You used to be, but you're not right now. Like, don't be so hard on yourself. That version of you doesn't matter because it's not an accurate representation. People think that medication for ADD, for instance, has a way of it's limitless, like the movie. It turns you into this genius. And no, it accounts for the things that make you you. but your brain just works a little bit differently. So it actually stimulates the brain. It's like, but it's putting brakes on your like prefrontal cortex, the decision making. It's like you have to you have to stimulate it fucking in order to get that stopping mechanism, in order to actually say, I'm going to put this off for long term, putting off short term whatever for long term goals, whatever. And so I'm going on a spiel. It's like, personally, I think that this whole conversation should, in general, just like when people want to judge behavior, it's like, well, do they have some sort of condition that makes that difficult? Because if they're not at their best, how can you judge them? Like, if your brain works a little bit differently and there's medication to help, don't you think that you should wait? Do you guys know, if you have undiagnosed, or I'm sorry, you have diagnosed ADD and you take your IQ test without medication, you will get like 10 to 15 numbers below just from not taking medication. That's significant. That's not just, that to me is like is clear evidence of missing details, but not stupid. Okay. It just bothers me. I don't know. I'm pro meds. Say what I think more people should be diagnosed. They're handing them out like candy. They should do it more.
It's profoundly genetic. Maybe 50% of conscientious behavior is accounted for entirely by the genes. The rest of it is a little bit mysterious as to how it aggregates. We're not entirely sure how that happens. There seems to be no very dependable way to massively improve conscientiousness with any kind of top-down intervention that we have done before. Having peaceful communities that give you a decent degree of education probably has some effect on that, but seemingly not as big of an effect on how we want. We also know that what your common home environment was, like how you were raised by your parents, has almost no effect on your conscientiousness as an adult, if any effect whatsoever. It's actually a little controversial to say almost no effect.
Well, what about the effect of emotional regulation? If you have a higher levels of what we call adverse childhood experiences, your emotional regulation is lower than that of someone who has less adverse childhood.
Those
fucking brilliant comeback. That is a big thing in the medical field. We know that childhood adverse experiences are huge in lifelong outcomes. It's huge. It's grounded. It's like one of the more grounded things. It's like people out here, they should get participation trophies. That's not really grounded, but what is grounded is that adverse childhood experience.
Studies controlling for genetics. Because almost none of these
How
studies
do you control for genetics?
Twin and adoption studies. Because when you look at the twin and adoption literature, a lot of that stuff completely disappears.
He's not wrong. He's not wrong. At first, when I watched it the first time, I was like, the nerve.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it specifically within the twin world, but knowing that you just said it's 50% genetic and 50%
Roughly.
something else that we don't know.
Sure.
What does that mean for the fact that those who are poor are more likely to be obese?
Yeah. So I can split it, I can simplify the matter. Two kind of different kinds of poor people. One kind of poor person has all of this kind of social burden foisted upon them, and they're doing their goddamn best. They're scrimping and saving. They're thinking long term. They're concerned about their health. They're concerned about their body weight. They're concerned about the choices of what kind of foods they're putting in their bodies, how it affects other things. They're trying to raise their children in a very diligent way. They don't spend excessively, and so on and so forth. Like I said earlier, those people don't tend to stay poor over the long term. Sometimes, through a variety of unfortunate circumstances, they stay poor, like someone who's incredibly conscientious. But
I have a hot take. I think undiagnosed ADD, when unmedicated, the individual lacks capacity to even make fully informed decisions. Hot take. Hot take. Even recently, dude, if If you know, you know. You get it.
Incredibly financially burdensome medical condition will continue to stay poor and conscientious, which is a tragedy, obviously. But there is another kind of poor person who is also poor, but exhibit very low trait conscientiousness, which means they just have a 1 day, 1 minute at a time, what I feel like doing, massive bias in their thinking and in their choice structure.
The emotional regulation of it.
Sure. The emotional regulation presupposes there is a desire to regulate emotion. There are two ways emotional dysregulation can present itself. One,
Yeah, I mean, it's the ability, whether or not they want.
I feel like to not want to suffer would be a desire. People don't enjoy suffering. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, they just don't want to be emotionally regulated. I genuinely don't think it's a desire. If it were, wouldn't everybody be fucking cool, calm, and collected? People repeat what they know, what feels comfortable.
Sure.
Jesus.
But
Like the video if you haven't liked it already. Love ya.
conscientiousness speaks to wants. People who are conscientious but have, let's say, profound attention deficit disorder,
That's me.
know they need to be making better choices.
Bullshit. I wasn't even aware of it. That's why I said we lack capacity. And I was self-aware as a kid. I had moments, but I could not. No. Not to say feel sorry. Fuck no. Don't feel bad. I'm just saying it's like, it wasn't even like I can't make better choices. It's that the thought didn't even come into my brain. See, a lot of people have a misconception about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Whatever. They have this misconception that they're like wild. We're a little wild. We're spicy, yo. But like, they have this misconception that they just want to do the fun thing and dopamine. And more often than not, because of the dopaminergic system being different than neurotypicals, when you do a task like working out, feels good, right? You get the feedback, it feels good. If you have ADHD, you're not getting feedback. So why the fuck would they have any sort of healthy habits? It's not that people necessarily seek out dopamine, but more often than not, they're tired. They don't even have the energy. You just sleep. And I was in sports and shit, you know?
Desperately
Okay,
pray
I'm
to
yelling.
God they can make better choices, but just keep getting off track because they can't maintain their attention and have a high degree of impulsivity. People of low trait conscientiousness don't care about making good choices nearly as much as they care about
Prove it. Prove it.
what's going to be fun and pleasurable for me to do now. And it's not even a value judgment. Fuck it, YOLO is a way of life, bro.
It's like self-medicating, even with sugar. Self-medicating, that is you trying to survive. Think back to like back in the day. Your body doesn't create urges unless the body needs it, right? I'm not saying need like it's healthy for it, but it's seeking it out somewhere. The quickest access you have to something is usually Coca-Cola, sugary drinks, whatever.
But it's a decent way of life, but it's going to lead to different outcomes. So if I am a poor person in the United States, I have a high degree of trait conscientiousness, I can easily make a variety of choices that will entirely prevent me from becoming obese.
Adderall is a double-edged sword though. I'm not even saying that you have to go on Adderall, but like if you're not even diagnosed, you can guarantee you're not getting therapy. Honestly, I wish I knew at a younger age. Like I knew that it was in the brain, but I didn't understand the dopaminergic system. But if somebody explained it to me like video games, and that's why people stay on video games so long, it's because they're constantly getting the reward while being hyper focused and shit. If I knew that, I would have totally set up everything to be like a video game in my life. Now I do it like now I've formed behaviors that do it. Things like having my favorite hand sanitizer in between rooms. So when I'm cleaning rooms, I get to spray because it smells so good. And it's like, reward. I wish I knew that. Okay. Sorry. I'm so excited.
In many circumstances. There's another component to this, which I'm excising for now, about food drive, which is also mostly genetic, which is critical to this discussion. I'll leave that for just a little later. If you're poor and someone tells you, well, I don't expect you to be fit because it's impossible for you, and you have high trait conscientiousness and you've thought this through for like 15 minutes, you're going to be like, Planet Fitness costs $10 a month. It's also irrelevant to go to a gym because you could do bodyweight exercises and have a high degree of physical activity for free anywhere. Any food you eat, you could just eat less of and become however much body weight you want. And if you're struggling with hunger, you can buy less palatable, actually more expensive foods and buy basic beans and rice like Abuela raised you to eat. And all of a sudden, like, you just don't overeat that because it's just not that good. We've seen that one of the sole explanatory factors for the rise in obesity is the ubiquity of high palatability foods everywhere, super cheap. Mm-hmm. If you don't access those, it saves you money and you become more fit. So the actual impediments to achieving fitness and health to poor people essentially almost don't exist. If you have trait conscientiousness very highly, if you have low trait conscientiousness, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor because you're just going to YOLO the shit. Whatever you feel like eating, that's what goes in. And McDonald's just tastes better. Now, you're not getting spaghetti, steak, and shrimp because you're not a rich motherfucker, but you can afford very high palatability foods, chips and soda and ice cream. That's all very affordable to you, and that's what you want. And if people say, like, what about your fitness and health? Generally, your opinion is like, and that's a totally fine opinion, but it's going to lead to some kind of outcomes. If you're ultra wealthy, you're in low conscientiousness, there's a high probability you're going to end up exactly as fat as someone who is poor and low conscientiousness. There was a study that came out about 10 years ago, studied food deserts. I don't like that term. It highly insults people who have actually dealt with real food insecurity. You go to the Soviet Union in 1988, that's a fucking food desert, right? Mm-hmm. And they took a look at the data and they said that people who had access to vehicles to leave the food desert to go to mega conglomerate grocery stores became and were fatter than the people that didn't because they had the same low conscientiousness and not a distinct desire to be fit and healthy and lean. So when they went to the bigger mega grocery stores, they just got even better versions of the same fun snacks that they had slightly less access to inside the food deserts. So a person's individual proclivity of how they want to eat and what they want to put in their bodies, or whether or not, or to what degree they care about it, is something that's not discussed much in the medical community. Because again, like, first of all, what are you going to do about it? Telling low conscientious people they have to care about their body weight and their health and think forward, it's usually very ineffective. It's insanely pedantic and paternalistic. And doctors usually have a very realistic approach. I'm going to try to help you in the way that I can. And if I tell you to eat healthy and you don't listen to me, we're going to medications. Mm-hmm. Is just the only thing I can do. So when you take a look at the two sort of very artificial groupings of poor people, if you have high conscientiousness and you're poor, all of the systemic factors keeping you obese seem to disappear almost entirely. And if you are of low conscientiousness, whether you're rich or poor, and you have a high food drive, you're going to be obese 99 times out of 100.
Eliminating highs and lows, 50th percentile people, they're the ones we're talking about when we're talking about generalizations. So why are we talking about high conscientiousness versus low?
Yeah, because
let's talk about middle.
Sure.
Where the majority of people live.
Yeah. Because poverty,
within one standard deviation.
Totally. That's a great question. On average, poor people tend to exhibit lower trait conscientiousness than richer people.
Which could be due to social factors.
Maybe.
As you said.
Maybe. The social factors are definitely a component of that. Mm-hmm. But we know that genetic factors are a massive component of that as well. And whether or not they're social or genetic, the conscientiousness is such a huge effector variable for everything else that's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
So are you saying we need to target the conscientiousness of people in order to actually make change, not actually the food deserts, not what they're eating? The trait is what we need to figure out ways to impact. Is that the takeaway of it?
No. I think that's a fine idea. My contention is that if we target food deserts, if we target big evil food companies, we are not targeting the core onus of why obesity is higher in poor people. And the reason it's higher in poor people is a two-factor situation. this is really explains, I think, probably 80+% of the variance.
This
on
is your
body weight.
theory.
Hypothesis. Yeah, theory is a gravitation, evolution, etc. Much lower than theory.
Right. I say theory in the non-scientific way.
Yes, stop doing that.
Yes.
So the biggest determinants of your body weight and proclivity to obesity in the modern world is going to be a two-factor system: your trait conscientiousness, degree of that, and your degree of food drive. How much do you like food? How much do you like to eat? How big of a deal is tasty food to you? You no doubt have some friends that they'll eat like 3.5 chips and they're like, that's pretty good. They just sit there. You're like, the fuck? I get into some chips. I eat the whole bag. Food is amazing. Not everyone is like that, right?
Sure.
So if you have someone who's a relatively low trait conscientiousness and they have a high degree of food drive, even if they're poor, they can still afford to be grotesquely obese. No problem. In the modern context. Back in the day, that was not the case. If you have someone who's wealthy and has any given food drive, they definitely have more of an arsenal to shoot. They can buy foods that are more filling, but are still tasty, like very Trader Joe's, Whole Foods type of shit.
Yeah.
That definitely has an effect. But they have to have some impetus to go buy those
Also,
foods.
pharmaceuticals. Because access to pharmaceuticals, especially these days, is a big difference.
Recently, for sure. Just recently. Because just 2 years ago, no one knew about Ozempic and no one even used it.
Well, bariatric surgery existed.
Totally. Yeah, that's very extreme situations. Yeah. Again, most people of low conscientiousness usually are not interested in bariatric surgery because they're like, why the hell would I go do that? It doesn't make sense to them why you would do that because they don't seem to have...
Again, we're talking about low conscientiousness versus the average.
Correct. So again, on average, you have a larger fraction of low conscientiousness people that are poor than are rich.
But the reason for why they're there, we don't yet know.
We know some of it, but we don't even need to postulate that because we have this thing of poverty causes obesity. That's the notion. Actually, a combination of high food drive and low conscientiousness cause obesity. It just so happens that people who are less wealthy on average also have lower trait conscientiousness.
It's like the situation with vitamin D, that those who have lower vitamin D levels have higher rates of certain illnesses. But then supplementing the vitamin D past the norm doesn't actually reduce the outcomes of those diseases. Sure. So much in the same way, when we talk about food drive, and you're talking about someone as that being one of the two variables that decide whether or not someone is obese, food drive is so impacted by social situations. One, if you're depressed, which if you're poor, there's a chance that you're not getting help for your mental health situations because we don't have great access to that in America. If you're poor, you have worse likelihood of developing adverse childhood events that lead to mental health conditions. You are likely to have been targeted by big food companies in their advertising, which has been proven through research for addictive products like ultra-processed foods. Cigarette companies will specifically target their advertisements based on zip code, based on...
Yeah, that's curious. I have a reason for why. Those people like those things better.
Right.
They buy them more.
Correct. And that could be an education component. That could be a genetic component. It's probably a multifactorial component. Yeah. But why I find that interesting is because once those people are hooked on the product in a way where, not that that food is addictive, and yes, it's true, it is addictive. And once you consume ultra-processed foods, you're constantly hungry, not satiated, you're craving all that stuff. But also, once you become obese, your epigenetics change of the fat cells. There was actually a recent study that came out, Eric Topol shared it on Twitter, where, again, in mice, so I have to give that prerequisite.
92% genetic similarity to humans, so you can extrapolate.
But still, I generally don't like jumping from mice to humans, but it is not illogical to see how the creation of fat cells for storage then can impact your behavior as years go on, and the difficulty of escaping from those circumstances. So if you're a child that is born in an area that's poor, these are the things that are likely to happen, and they're not going to happen in every circumstance. Worse education, more targeting by big food companies, worse social situation from a mental health component, high likelihood of being...
How can you increase your conscientiousness, Mo? having a goal and staying to it, having a schedule, being diligent, responsible, saying no to going out on the weekends because you don't want to poison your liver. Don't drink, things like that. Drink water, exercise.
Fed ultra processed foods by parents, which then raise your risk of being obese, then sets you up as an adult to regain that weight, even if you try and lose it, in a much easier way than someone who never had that issue that grew up wealthy. And then you're saying here that the only reason is because of the trait conscientiousness?
Definitely not. I was explicit
But
that
those
it was
two,
not the only
the
reason.
food drive and the trait,
They probably account for, I think, something like 80% of the variance. Yeah.
over what we just said.
Yeah, so all the other stuff you mentioned is insanely influenced by trait conscientiousness as the baseline variable. The reason that people have, let's say, a more crime-ridden environment is because more people around are low conscientiousness. The tie between conscientiousness and criminality is insanely high correlation. So some of those same people are more likely to be criminally prone. They're less likely to take care of their communities, leaving trash everywhere. They're more likely to make rapid choices based on desire and thus make you next to them the proxy target of big food advertisement. Big food didn't try to target poor people just because. You'd much rather target rich people with every product you sell because they have more money to spend. Curious why they would target the poor, because there are some large fraction of them that are low conscientiousness to begin with that want these sorts of things. They are attractors for them, and they are the progenitors of many of these bad circumstances. Trauma doesn't come from the ether. Trauma comes from people being nasty around you. Most nastiness in humans is because people have a high degree of impulsivity and just kind of do what they want. That is the same variable of low conscientiousness. Basically, in some large component, not totally, describing why things are the way they are with very poor communities, let's say in the United States.
I think the difference in our hypothesis is that I see how you've gotten to see such a strong correlation between low conscientiousness and outcomes in obesity.
Causation.
That's what I was going to get to. I see the very strong correlation that exists there, but at the same time, I see the very strong correlation as well as poor education, difficult circumstances, all those variables that are also very strongly correlated. And I want to know how you jump to the causation without having a trial that impacts the trait and then seeing a better outcome. When you said that that trait can't really be changed.
Yeah. Behavioral genetics, twin and adoption studies, genealogy, heritability studies that show that your genetics is profoundly important as to how your life lays out in front of you. Everything else becomes usually secondary unless it is extremely, extremely different from the norm, which definitely explains some of the variation with really nasty growing up circumstances, but not as much as many people would think. So if you ever dip into the behavioral genetics literature, and I encourage everyone listening to give it a shout, don't expect to be very cheery at the end of that dive. It's a real thing, man. It's a real thing.
I certainly believe it to be a real thing at the extremes, at the highs and lows. But I think when you look at 75% of the population, I can't imagine it being a causative factor to the degree that another random variable is.
I gotcha. So I'll cite a couple of offhand random studies just for illustrative purposes. There's at least one study which showed that past the age of about 12 or 13, your common home environment, where you grew up, has almost no effect on your eating habits. Because they did it with twin and adoption research, and they found out that if you came from a genetic stock of people that were prone to obesity or prone to making food choices that were more snacky, junky kinds of foods, if you were adopted into a home that gave you healthy foods, as a child up until teenage years, you ate what mom and dad made you, healthy food, the whole thing. And then as soon as teenage years hit, and you were able to make your own food choices, you veer so far into the average predictive of what your parents used to like that the degree of influence of your parents, adoptive parents' healthy eating instructions are almost undetectable.
That's wild to me. Isn't that crazy?
insanely rigorous research keeps coming up over and over again. Any parents who have had children
Almost 30.
listening to this show, if you've had one child, you can attest to the fact of how great of a parent you were and how your effects made them who they were. As soon as you have child number 2, you realize, holy shit, we're shooting in the dark. Kids kind of become sort of whatever the hell they were supposed to become, and we have barely any effect. And anyone who thinks they have a large degree of effect on a teenager is, I don't know, insert joke here, is large degree of delusion. The conventional wisdom on how education works and how upbringing works cannot possibly survive the rigorous data that shows that, for example, as I stated just now, food choice proclivity has almost nothing to do with a common home environment.
After age 12.
Correct.
And what about before it?
Before it has a ton to do because you don't make the choices that you have. Like, they put stuff on your plate and you eat it.
And don't you believe that if you're set up before the age of 12 with bad habits that potentially created childhood obesity, that you're going to have worse outcomes as you get older?
Yeah, for sure.
So then how are you saying that those social impacts are not equally as causative as the trait?
Because when you look at the behavioral genetic data, the social outcomes at the extremes can absolutely have an effect. But most of what you think are the social outcomes is literally just the expression of people's genetic proclivities over and over.
See, that I question, because if you look at this trait or even obesity overseas, it's not the same. America's uniquely different here. So I think it although I get what he's saying, it's like, I don't know. I think there's something else.
Mom and dad have the same ones. You have the same ones. And if you try to get kids to eat hyper-palatable food all the time when they're younger, it definitely affects them when they're older, on the margins, 100%. But
I used to only eat chicken nuggets. I know this isn't about me. I ate Kit Kats for lunch every day. Maybe a Reese's cup. I just either only ate chicken nuggets or didn't eat. I ate a lot of sugar. And now I follow like a Mediterranean diet. It's not a diet to me though. I think Mediterranean is best food. But it's like, and I've tried a lot of weird food. I was forced to, but like, I'm just saying.
it doesn't affect their proclivity to make the same choices when they
Look
grow
how
up.
fat you are.
They're going to start eating healthy and thinking of the future as soon as they become teenagers, just like their actual mom and dad did. And then they're going to have extra adiposity and struggle with it. However, unless you become
I wouldn't eat noodles though, because I didn't like the texture. It made me want to throw up. And so I wasn't allowed to leave the table until I ate it. It was so scary. My mom's terrifying. I was like, I can't eat the noodles. They're wiggly. And I didn't think I would get over it. I did. But I still don't understand why people order pasta dishes. You guys are weird. Unless you're in Italy, where it's like good. It's like, why? Just wondering.
Profoundly obese as a child, childhood overweightness generally resolves itself as teens mature into adults, because unless you continue on the path of egregious overeating, more or less you can grow out of considerable chubbiness as you get older.
I would like to see the data. How many kids that are obese and what their rates into adulthood are.
Sure.
I don't know what the
Sure.
Do you know what they are?
Not offhand, no. But it's things that happen to you in childhood can affect you long term, but don't seem to affect you long term nearly as much as people would think, because your genetics become more and more an effector variable that's better and better detected as you get older.
In deciding causation, right, we think about changing a variable, randomizing it, and seeing what happens. If I could wave a magic wand right now and stop food companies from advertising to children hyper-processed foods, especially in poorer areas, if I create access in food deserts, I know you don't like the term, but in areas where there's less fruits, vegetables for sale, and I sell more of those foods, less of the ultra-processed foods, even through an authoritative method. If I greatly improve mental health support.
The biggest one. Before he finishes, because they're going to go off on the mental health. Something I've noticed is that, like, in the Netherlands specifically, there was like one grocery store and Aldi. I remember there was an Aldi, but they would close at like 8, 9 PM. So you were like, I think it was 8 o'clock actually, and you were like forced to go there before then. I used to think, oh, there's so much drive-through foods open all around America. That's making them fat. And I feel like it's like 24-hour access. Nothing good happens after 9 PM. Okay. It's like, what are you really getting? And when are you eating it? Whatever. But another thing I noticed is like, uh, you couldn't get food everywhere. Where else can you get? Like in America, you can get food at Target. There's like a kitchen. You can get food. They did have food at gas stations, but nothing crazy. Nothing like ours. Like you can get full meals. Aside from that, I was looking at the laws in terms of advertising or whatever, and something that they do different in Europe is they are not allowed to advertise any sugary anything to kids. No Tony the Tiger. Like, what the fuck? Tricks are for kids. None of him. And celebrities are not allowed to endorse unhealthy foods, and in Mexico specifically. And I think the South Chile, I forgot, maybe Argentina, you're not allowed to have commercials targeted towards sugary processed foods or drinks when kids are home from school. I was like, they know something. Why don't we do that? I think one of the main differences has to be that advertising. I was looking into like billboards and stuff. If you haven't traveled overseas, they don't have that. It's just America having billboards and like, get your meds here. Like, pick up your meds and get your drinks. Fucking nuts. They don't have that. Another thing is it's like really common to walk after meals. I feel like that's a huge thing. When I lived in the city, having to walk places alone, just immediately the weight comes off. You might not think it does, but dude, there's little things. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, when it comes to education, like how do the Europeans educate on America? They talk about the super size me, they do the documentary, the portion sizes. But just from it's like, yeah, portion size, but I'm Italian, y'all. Like Italians don't stop feeding you. And like more often than not, they're not really overweight. Okay. That just might be my small little world. But it's like if you look at them overseas, like they're pretty thin. So what's going on? I think there's something. I feel like they're fucking with the satiable feeling, that feeling of being full. Like something's not right. If anything, I feel like it makes you grab for more food. Um, Personally, if I get any fast food, and I don't necessarily do that often, it's like I have to eat it in very small portions. I can't eat it all at once. And I find if I only eat a few bites and then walk away, I don't even get hungry again until like an hour later, but I'm starving. And it's like, okay, you ate breakfast, whatever. I don't know. I feel like it's all dependent on different people. I don't eat anything that's like, actually, come to think of it, I don't really eat anything at home that's processed. So I'm told. For God, no, the eggs are. I'm just kidding. Like, yeah. shit. And I've been so hard on myself. God damn it. God damn it. I cook every meal too. I don't meal prep. Why do I feel like no, I really like hummus. I don't make hummus by scratch. So like hummus, tzatziki. Dude, I used to not be able to say that word. Sick. I didn't. Tzatziki. But like even pesto I'll make by scratch, but I don't even do it with the right ingredients. I do like avocado, pine nuts, and some shit, you know? I'm just thinking. I've never had maple syrup. And I loved McDonald's hotcakes when I was younger. Never had them with syrup. Anyways, I'll shut up. Sorry.
Maybe even medication in poorer areas.
What's the mental health thing have to do with it?
Fucking everything. So my thing in the beginning was I think mental health is what drives these behaviors. If you don't have that in check, you're fucked. Like, for lack of a better word. I think they should train. I know doctors rotate, and I don't know any doctor that wouldn't rotate in this psychiatry. I feel like they all take psychiatry. Am I wrong? I feel like if you know any doctors in your life that went through rotations, I feel like they all do the psychiatry one, but I don't feel like they do it enough. I don't feel like mental health is really compounded into the overall treatment plan. Like they always will refer to a psychiatrist, which is good, like if it's not your specialty. But in my opinion, I feel like a lot of like the miscommunication with doctors and patients, just from like what you read on Reddit and shit, like not really that comprehensive. It seems like a lot of times people get dismissed on their symptoms, and like from like a doctor's point of view, they assume that you're just neurotic. And it's like, so then why don't you just tell them that? You know, like why don't you refer them? Like, I know how anxiety is so pervasive and can really make you feel a certain type of way. It's one of the most common mental health conditions. If you know that when a patient's talking about symptoms like this screams anxiety, you would think that this would be the topic of conversation. But then people feel like they're not being taken seriously, like from a patient. Oh, you just think I'm crazy? Well, I'm not 5'1" you, but like, yeah. But like, I think it's okay. I think a lot of conditions that people want to find physical ailments for are mental health conditions. I don't think it makes you crazy. To be honest with you, maybe I'm nuts. I don't know.
The mental health thing is that some people overeat as a way of coping through difficult moments.
It's because they
That's bullshit. I know it's a thing, but it just really bothers me. Because I feel like people that overeat are not aware of overeating like that. Genuinely. I feel like they're unconscious. They're alive. Maybe I'm projecting on that one. Never mind.
have high food drive, and that's a very happy thing for them to do. That's profoundly genetic. Many people in their most stressful time cannot eat.
Sure, but it still doesn't change the fact
Sure.
that when they're sad, they eat.
Sure.
And if they're more likely to be sad in an area.
I know, I see you, Devin. Torshaa, one of these days you got to do a video adjacent to this topic around parasites in foods. I heard, I don't know if it's true, that Americans are more likely to have them. I personally have never done a parasitic cleanse. I probably should, because I heard if you travel to Europe and then come back home, it's like common. Yeah. It's one of those things that it's like alternative science, just to keep it 100. But I'm always like, if you find something that's alternative and it fucking works for you, do it. Why wouldn't you do it? It's not real science, but it works for you. It's crazy. whatever works. Sometimes I feel like there's things out there that don't get put in medical journals and they're not celebrated, but they absolutely help. In my opinion, chiropractors are like one of them. Some people would be like, it's not really science. Well, I don't know what the bullshit crack is, but it's making me think it's working. So I'm sitting up straighter, aren't I? And this is fun. Okay. Dude, people are like, I don't know. Humans can be tricked on this shit. Why do you think advertising is such a big industry? Why do you think if people couldn't be tricked so easily, people wouldn't be obese? Okay, the social engineering wouldn't even be a thing. Love you.
where they can get help for a mental health
I think these
condition.
people also eat when they're happy. Celebratory eating is a cultural universal.
It is.
A moment of silence for Supreme Cobra Commander. I passed a 3-foot long tapeworm. Are you okay? How? How'd you get it? How'd you get it? Do you have dogs? I'm always like, fuck, I'm gonna get something from my dogs. They sleep in my
But
bed.
I'm talking about the poorer outcomes where there's worse social outcomes
Yeah.
and there's worse mental health support.
Yeah. What I'm saying is people with a high food drive don't need any stress to eat more. They don't need any less
Yeah,
stress to
I
eat
don't like
less.
doing the highs or lows because that's not
I mean, cortisol absolutely influences you significantly. I feel like they brushed over that.
representative of the average.
We're not talking about the average. We're talking distinctly about highs and lows because we're talking about poverty versus wealth and its effects on obesity is a
So just on a bell curve, they're talking about the middle. Or I'm sorry, average, the middle. Bye. But there's going to be outliers on both ends of it that are just significantly over here. And right now he's distinguishing, or he's making the observation, or he's saying it, that we are talking about the anomalies right now, because in some certain situations you talk about the extremes in order to set that boundary on lines or
conversation
whatever.
exclusively of highs and lows. Because in the average, actually, you can't disaggregate anything, and who knows what's going on.
Yeah, I'm saying in the average human, not let's say you don't know and you're blinded to what people's poverty level is. You have to create a graph of what the average is.
Sure. So you're saying a lower degree of mental health on average causes people to become more obese.
Yeah, I think it's a factor.
Is that
I think it's a
substantiated by
correlative
literature?
factor.
Okay. Is there like a thing where like
Well, ACEs, that's like the emotional regulation of it all correlates very strongly with people who have issues of crime, issues of overeating, higher rates of blood pressure elevations. So those variables are there. I don't know about the twin studies because I've never looked at those. But my point was that if you wave a magic wand and you fix all those issues that I discussed, you don't think there will be a significant improvement in obesity in poor areas?
I think the improvement.
Also, just something that while researching for this video, I found that ADHD is pretty prevalent in lower economic areas or poverty areas, whatever.
In nearly all factors would be very impressive and hugely helpful. Locally, not systemically, because
You know what I should have looked up? ADHD overseas. I know there's been a shortage everywhere. Globally? Huh. I didn't think to look at that. My
you
bad.
have all sorts of really nasty side effects, like drug dealers who deal in food and not actual drugs because now tasty food is illegal. And
Well, I didn't say make it illegal. I said reduce and improve education.
How do you reduce it if you don't make it illegal?
Correlation, not causation. Yeah, I'm making the claim though that the correlation is so fucking high and significant that we would be stupid not to assume it does cause. But I'm also insane. So, but no, there's sometimes where there's a strong correlation to something. There's a really strong correlation that if you have ADD and you don't take medication, you're undiagnosed ADD, your chances of becoming an alcoholic or addicted to any substance is so high that that it's really important to treat those people early. to avoid that. Doctors already say this all the time. So there's like some times where, I mean, if it's if you have better outcomes on medication, then yeah. But you're right, technically. Boring. Can we just be insane?
You limit targeted marketing.
Okay.
Because that's so influential and that's outside of our control. There's ways that food companies change what we eat without ever us even realizing that they're doing it. It's the invisible hand.
Yeah. So I guess then
changing government policy.
Sure, food companies people wouldn't know as much about tasty junk food because food companies don't advertise them.
I feel like when we point to just junk food, we're missing the plot. I don't know why I have this strong intuition. It's just like maybe I'm just thinking about my paradigm, but do you guys really think that people are just consuming excess amount of junk food, or do you think that they're consuming like maybe like a typical amount, but the junk food is loaded with stuff that is less digestible than before? Okay, you guys know I'm not a scientist. It's like this idea that people are going to the grocery store and buying heaps of junk food, it feels kind of like an assumption we've made. I don't know. I guess we could look at like groceries bought over time.
So you'll have people who take advantage of that, and let's say in the ghetto, and bring to young children for sale healthy treats unhealthy treats they've never seen, and those kids are like, well, what is that? Like Cheez-Its. You ever had?
You don't need medication for ADD. I just want you to get diagnosed so you understand that you have a different brain and you need to set your life up a little bit differently. If that's putting hand sanitizer that smells good in different rooms so that every time you're going to clean a new room, you can use that, like me. That's my little dopamine hit. It's like, then you should do that. But if people don't know that they have something, it's like, well, can you ever really know? I think so. Can you ever really know without looking at a brain scan? Does it really matter if we're going on symptomology? Is that a word? Or like if you're not functioning like a normal human being, I feel like that's evidence. But maybe I'm just crazy.
I'm sure that'll happen.
It'll happen.
But the question is, what will happen to the number?
Yeah, I think it'll go down. I think these if they magic wand it, it'll be helpful for sure. Here's my contention. There are a huge fraction of people, usually on the political left, or just moderate, reasonable people who have been educated in the United States or the Western world, who believe that these variables of social effect, food companies, etc., are, if not only the only variables, that very close to the predominant variables. They expect the magic wand of external social factors to be waved and fix almost the whole problem, if not the whole problem entirely. What you're going to get is almost an inversion of that reality, where you'll get like a very serious improvement, 5, 10, 15, 20% of improvement in the problem. And you'll have like 80% of the problem still left over, and be wondering why, since we have these amazing educational programs, these amazing programs of reducing food advertising, mental health enhancement, so on and so forth, that some people are still demographically much more likely to be obese than others. It is because we ignored the two most primary causative variables, which is conscientiousness and food drive. If you have low food drive, it doesn't matter how conscientious you are or not, you're probably not going to be overweight, because like food's just not as big of a deal. If you have a very high food drive and you're very wealthy, you can deploy quite a bit of technologies and personal chefs and all that stuff. You'll almost certainly be significantly more overweight than otherwise, but maybe less so. If you have very high food drive and you have a low degree of conscientiousness, you're going to be very, very, very overweight, and all of the sociological variables in the world cannot help you to a huge extent. Can help you to a moderate extent. We're going to have so much left on the table, they're going to be wondering why. So what I'm proposing, this is why I'm so passionate about the subject, is I like to take holistic approaches. I like to understand the landscape of the entire issue we're dealing with before going and rendering very, very confident conclusions. For example, If you look at the British public schooling system, there's some public schools that are not so great, I guess, and some public schools that are just unbelievable. And the recent, this is quoting Robert Plomin's work, behavioral geneticist, behavioral genetic analysis of childhood success in school and after, especially after school, has there's the quality of schooling, quote unquote, by ranked school systems in the United Kingdom that you received has almost no predictive effect on how successful you become. And when you see that, and this is insanely rigorous data, what do you have to shake off the page to make sense of that? Because when I read that for the first time, I was like, I almost stopped the car. It was an audiobook, and I was like, the fuck? How? Like, it was supposed to be a thing that you inject education into people, and they just get better. And all of a sudden, when gradations of public schools...
I'm going to switch the video just to switch it up. I have 2 more.
The bliss point is just that sensory profile where you like food. This bliss point and goes down. I started having meetings with product developers, and they told me, if you could do this with a bunch of different ingredients simultaneously, maybe there's a bliss point that's really loved. Well, I did it, and by golly, there was. When you follow this approach of varying the ingredients, you find that there is no one bliss point. There are groups of bliss points. And this led to 3 or 4 different pregos that led to 37 pregos, umpteen different coffees, teas, cereals, and you name it.
The Nacho Industrial Complex has discovered something called the bliss point.
It's like crack cocaine for the brain.
Moshkovitz.
Does it make you addicted to food? Absolutely not. It just makes it delicious.
Go into that.
For type 2 diabetes as a daily injection. And
Do you think that every patient should be on,
Ooh,
that
it's
is
loud.
classified
Rip
as
the
obese
ears.
by the American medical standards, should be offered a medication?
I cannot say 100% of the patients that
Large
have obesity,
majority.
but the majority would benefit from the drug, yes.
That's scary, because then we're saying like a huge percentage of the United States should be on these medications. Have we gone that far? Please welcome to the Checkup Podcast, Dr. Rocio Salas Whalen, who is triple board certified, internal medicine, endocrinology, and obesity medicine. I brought in the top specialists to talk about a topic that I know so many people are interested in, Ozempic and related medications. Today we talk about how a lot of people who are trying to lose weight are actually doing it wrong. And Dr. Salas Whalen has a very strong message for those who believe that taking Ozempic is the easy way out. Hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's get started. Woo! All right, Dr. Salas Whalen, we're here to talk about the current situation that exists in the world with the Ozempic craze, the conversation that has stirred up surrounding weight, obesity, and I can't think of a more appropriate person to talk about this conversation with than yourself, being an endocrinologist and being board certified in obesity medicine. So you're the top of the top expert on this field. Does that feel like a fair assessment?
I do think so, also because I've been using the weight loss medications since they were first available back in 2010, but the first one was in 2005 for type 2 diabetes. But off-label, we've been using them for almost 20 years now. So yeah, I feel like I have enough expertise with these medications. I saw this coming way before it actually made so much news, right?
So were you already seeing patients within your practice using the medication off-label before it became this hit
Since
story?
2010, when Victoza came out. Actually, Bayera was the first one in 2005, but there was very, very new. So in 2010, Victoza was approved for type 2 diabetes as a daily injection. And when we started using it, because it was a new drug, we were seeing patients coming back with better glucose control and weight loss. But because it doesn't cause hypoglycemia, then we started using it off-label, Victoza back then, for weight loss without diabetes. Then Saxenda came out as the weight loss version 2 years later.
And for the people at home, like they may have heard of Ozempic, and that's the one that's in their mind simply because of media. But there are multiple medications that are using either the same exact medicine that's found within Ozempic, or maybe a sister medication or a related medication. How many are there? Why are there so many? Can you take us through that?
So I think Ozempic became the poster child of incretins and weight loss medications, but definitely there's many varieties. So the class of drugs are called incretins, and as with any class of drugs, we're going to have different versions, right? And every time a pharmaceutical is going to come with a new one, it should be better, with less side effects and more effective, right? And that's what we're seeing. So the first one was Victoza, named or branded as Saxenda for weight loss from Novo Nordisk, then Ozempic for type 2 diabetes, and branded for weight loss as Wegovy. And our newest of the bunch, I like to say is the iPhone 15 now of the drugs, is Mounjaro by Eli Lilly, which is tirzepatide. But this is only the beginning, right? Many other pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, Amgen, they're coming with their own version of it, right? I think the more competition we have, the hopefully they will be less expensive.
What's your take on doctors using the ones that have been FDA approved to be used for type 2 diabetes or a related condition as off-label strictly for weight loss?
I think it's a necessary evil. Unfortunately, the way that we diagnose obesity right now is with BMI. But unfortunately, if we use BMI exclusively to diagnose or to choose or to say who's going to need the medication or benefit for the medication, we're cutting a lot of the population that will benefit from the drug. So if we go beyond measurements, and actually the American Medical Association now said that we should not use the BMI as a sole diagnostic tool for obesity, which I think is huge. It's a huge advance, right? We have to use other measurements, percentage body fat, muscle mass, visceral fat. If we use those, more people will benefit from the drugs, right? And I think if we just concentrate on who the guidelines tells us, then again, we're going to be missing many patients. So that's why we can use them off-label, even on patients that a BMI may not be diagnosed as obesity or overweight.
In my head, when I think of BMI being inaccurate in labeling someone as obese or not obese, it comes to mind like a strong person, a bodybuilder with a lot of muscle mass, that their BMI might look really high, but I could see every muscle in their body and they're not actually an unhealthy figure, if you will. They're not carrying excess weight.
And I would say that's the minority of a wrong BMI. What I see more in my clinic, over 2,000 patients that I have doing body composition, is we tend to underdiagnose more than overdiagnose, meaning that I've seen many patients with a normal BMI or even a BMI of 21, 22, which you say they're completely normal. But once you look at the...
Okay, guys, I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to let my dogs out. Thank you for watching. We'll finish because we still have the rest of the debate to go. But like the video, comment, subscribe, share your favorite weight loss tips below. Okay, love you. Bye.